So for the waste, just added another div, gave it a name, and actually I'm not using IDs, so I really need to strip those out. On the values, I gave it the point values, and then on the main, I then just took and did a parse int on the value, and then on the class, I passed it in as waste. And then this dot waste points equals waste. The only other thing I had to do here was, of course, set the form waste value to whatever object from the object dot waste points. And that worked. Seemed to work fine. Okay, so let's just continue on with the second more challenging one, which was the amount of waste you recycle. So these naturally, based on the input, seem like checkboxes to me. And you can see that what I did is I implemented another filled set here, and I created checkboxes for each one. I kind of thought, and actually as I was doing this, it almost made me want to refactor my whole thing into tables because it seemed like I could control them, because this is starting to look way too busy. But this is what happens when you have a longer form. Okay, so first I did that, and then I actually did some checking around, because I thought about, if I have these checkboxes, how can I see, or how can I write code? Because of course I could write logic for each one. We wrote logic up here for one, but how would could I just iterate through, right? Or not even iterate, how could I just check in each individual one? I could totally do that. Seems like a lot of code, okay? And then I started thinking about the really powerful, and we haven't used it, so I think it's a good time to think about it, is query selector all. Because there's query selector, but then query selector all will return based on your selectors, okay? A particular, right, it's going to query all them and it's going to return. So normally we've just gotten back from get element by ID or get query selector and giving it an ID. We've gotten back one reference into the DOM, but by using all, we could then locate a specific list of inputs that meet our criteria, which is awesome. And the one thing though you have to think about is when it returns, it'll look like a normal array, but it's actually what we call a node list. So it has some of the functionality of an array, but not all of it. And then it got me thinking about and studying about how do I iterate over a node list. And it's often called an HTML collection, but even that, right, seemed like a pain. Seemed like there's got to be a better way, right? And again, here's just different examples. I definitely recommend checking out again, because we haven't really used it a lot in this course, and it is definitely worth looking at. So the thing I went to chat and I asked, right, was that I said I have 5 inputs. I think it was 5. How do I get a count of how many are checked? And so query selector all, I was like, okay, I was on the right track. Query selector all totally makes sense. And I could say input type checkbox. Okay, right? And then I could look for checked. So this is going to query the document object model. It's going to look for all inputs type checkbox, and it's going to look for the attribute or if it's checked or not. I was like, okay, and then, because I had thought about this too, I can just get the length off of it. Oh yeah, that would work. But then I thought, wait a minute. Because of this, I already have a checkbox. Okay? So I'm like, how could I get around that? How could I actually think about that? And so I said, I have other checkboxes on the form. How could I count only selected ones? And then it was like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? Create a class. And they call it count me, right? So then you can do document query selector, and then it queries by the class and looks for the checked, is it checked or not, looking for that. So, and again, does the length. So that was, again, knowing how to write good questions. Again, I don't know if they're good, but it's the way I approach this. So then I had to start thinking about how do I now implement this, right? How do I implement this into my code, right? Because, and I'm going to come over here to main, and I'll walk you through it. So I'm actually going to modify it during this code walkthrough, because as I was doing it, I'm like, you know what, there's even an easier way to do this. So, because part of it is you're starting with 25 points, 24 points, okay? And then if a user selects, right, for every one they select, you get to subtract 24 or 4 points for each one. That's why you want the length, okay? So what I ended up doing, first of all, and I'll just walk you through this code to start, and let's make it a little bigger, is I ended up here creating inside the event listener a recycle object. And then I said it was going to be the return value from calling determine recycle items and passing the E to it, the event. Okay, so in here, arrow function, and this was where the really fun thing to do for me was document query selector all, look for recycle. Okay, so what I did there, and I can show you it here in the index file, is I gave them a class of recycle. For those of you taking HTML and CSS, you can give this the attribute class without actually creating the class. So, because the document query selector doesn't care if there's CSS associated with it, you can just include that, which is kind of nice. Okay, so then I said look for all the recycled that have the checked attribute and then give me the length back. And that gives me the number of checked. And then I decided I'm going to return an object here. Okay, so once I determine what that number of checked is, then I'm going to return an object. And what I'm going to do here is give it a key and a value. So these are going to be end up true or false, because if it's checked, it's true, right? If it's not checked, it's false. And then the last item on the object, I actually calculated recycle points. And I took 24 and I subtracted number of items checked, which was up here, times 4, okay? And then subtracted that and then put in the recycle points, or populated that. And then I returned, of course, now I have that recycled object here. And now everything else I'll walk you through in a minute how I did it, because in this case you might not think about, now why would I have an object here? Mostly because my class is just getting huge as far as what I'm throwing into it. And this just made sense to me. So now I'm going to have a object literal inside of a instantiated object from the class. So I'm leveraging both the standard object literal being stored inside of an instantiated object from the class. Okay, and then I just stored that here. But I want to show you before I actually walk through a little more code. And let's go over to main here, right? So I had this function, of course, right here that does all this work. But then I was thinking just a minute ago, I was like, you know what? I actually don't even have to do this. I can just call determine, I can just grab this and right here, because this is the item after the waste, right, is just do that. I don't actually have to put the last one there because it's the last one in there. But that would work as well. And to me it's a little cleaner, right? I can get rid of this. It still calls this function, right? And it gives me my values. So let's first just watch that work. Okay, so let's come over here. So now we can see that that is, and I would set a breakpoint inside of here, right? I'm actually going to fill out mine here. I don't have both, interestingly enough. 3 to 5 probably is right. It'd be interesting to go back and look at our original counts that we did the first week. I do recycle all these things, mostly because the city makes it a little easier these days. Still was an interesting one, right? And food waste, right? So it's on each one. Okay, so now I have my breakpoint set. Oh, yeah, I gotta do this. Missed that one. Okay, so now in here, right? So now you can see here before we get, and this is important to understand too. It's like before it jumps into the class and shows us what we're passing into the class, it actually has to run this function. That's why it's stopped inside of here. And now it's going to make those calculations, set up that object, and now it has that return value. And what I can do is roll over here and look at, yep, there it is. There's the points. And in this case, that makes sense because I've selected true for all of these. Okay. And the points would be 0. That's awesome. Okay. So now I can just roll through that. Now, the key here is also when I get to populating this inside the object, right? And I'm going to jump over these, jump over this, and I'm going to just look at total. Okay, oh, I should have looked at total. So let's actually look at total here. I run down here and look at it. Okay. So then I had to, in this case, say this recycle, because that's the key inside the instantiated objects dot recycle points. So I could reference just the points inside of there. Okay, so let's go ahead and let that run and see. Yep, there we go. Perfect. So now I had to think about, now that I've done that, right, so a couple things just to review what I did there. Okay, so I set up a function. I called the function first just inside my event listener, and then I ended up doing it just where I wanted the value populated or value to result be passed. Because remember, I'm returning, and the value of I'm returning is an object. And so it had to run that function first so that it could pass to the class definition, the class itself, the value of that. Okay, so I had to do that part. And then inside the class, all I had to do here is just reference recycle, as coming in as recycle, but also making sure that when I reference the total. Okay, so that was that part. And so the last part of this, and let's just see if this runs on the last one I did, right? So I'm just going to let this run. And it brings back all of these values. Now, this is where I started going, there's got to be a better way to do this, and I know there is. And it would make me, which is not a bad thing, go through and have these names be consistent. And if I had done that, I could have absolutely made this a loop where it just loops over. But I may have run into the same thing on some items where I had to say it only you loop over particular items, but that worked as well. So in this case, right, glass, form glass checked equals object recycle glass. Okay. And if we just walk through that, let's just go back in here and hit edit, set that breakpoint just so you can see that. Oh, let's jump over that. Oh, that was on submission. That's right. It's actually right here on edit. And then you can look at it here so you can see that this is true. Right, so object here is true, so then it sets those equal, because right now it's by default, it's because the form submission, in this case we've cleared it and now we're repopulating the values into the form. Okay, so a little bit of coding there for sure. I didn't walk you through every bit of it because I think it would have just taken a long time, but I at least walk you through my logic of how I did it. I look forward to seeing how you approach this one. I will tell you this, I did set with this and think about it for probably about an hour and a half, where I was like, and I was researching different things and then ultimately came upon the approach, and then I just needed a little more detail, and that's where chat helps. So I think it leverages a lot of what we have access to these days. Okay, so modify any code, I'll give you a commit message on this one, and then let's do the last one. Tally up annual transport cost. Okay, let's do this one. This one looks pretty straightforward. Actually, it looks like in this case we have 3 different options, right? So for personal, usage, public usage. I tell you what, let's do this. Let's actually leave this one for the discussion. This one, if you want to attempt it now, you totally can. No, that's what we're going to do for the code discussion. It seems like a pretty straightforward one to do. Kind of fun to implement this last one, and we don't have to do 9 because we've been doing it all along. Would be kind of fun to figure out though ways that if it was less than 60, like that would be fun in our output, right? Where right now we're doing nth child, even and odd on the output, right? Maybe we could, where it's 60 or less, green that line or something. Anyway, there's just so much you could do, so much you could play with to have fun with this. All right, I think I will leave that last one for the discussion.